A shy girl faces the shock of undergoing hemorrhoid surgery, only to discover that her doctor is a young, wealthy man who ends up stealing her heart. Ivy Reynolds stood nervously at the clinic's front desk, gripping the hem of her cardigan so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her throat was tight, her chest constricted. Although the air in the waiting room was cool and sterile, sweat dampened her palms. "Miss Reynolds?" A nurse called out, clipboard in hand. Ivy looked up wide-eyed and gave a small nod. Rising to her feet, she kept her gaze locked on the floor, too ashamed to meet anyone's eyes, afraid they might see right through her, sensing the humiliation wrapped around her like a second skin. Inside the intake room, the nurse smiled gently, though her voice was efficient and practiced. "Let's just review a few things before the doctor sees you. First time here?" Ivy nodded stiffly. "Any previous rectal surgeries?" Ivy froze, her heart pounding, her face flooding with heat. Her voice caught in her throat. She choked. "I just want to disappear." The nurse's demeanor softened. "It's okay," she said quietly. "We just need the information so the doctor can take the best care of you." Ivy nodded again, more robotically this time, wishing she could vanish. After marking a few boxes on a form, the nurse left, leaving Ivy alone perched on the examination table. She fidgeted with her hands, crossed her legs tightly as if she could somehow protect herself. She reassured herself that the doctor would probably be older, detached, professional, someone who would treat the appointment clinically, without looking her in the eye. Then the door opened, and everything changed. A tall man, maybe in his early 30s, entered wearing navy scrubs under a white coat. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his attentive, kind eyes met hers immediately. "Good morning, Miss Reynolds," he said warmly, extending a hand. "I'm Dr. Harrington." Ivy couldn't move. She couldn't even breathe. Her mind screamed, No, not him. He wasn't the detached, elderly doctor she had imagined. He was heartbreakingly handsome, and that made it so much worse. Panic twisted her stomach, choked her throat. Sensing her discomfort, he took a step back, his voice soft and reassuring. "It's okay. We're not rushing anything. I just want to talk for a bit and make sure you're comfortable before we move forward." Comfortable? The word felt like a cruel joke. She was about to expose the most humiliating part of herself to a man who looked like he belonged on a magazine cover. I think I should leave," she blurted, her voice cracking. She started to stand, but his voice stopped her. "Ivy," he said gently but firmly. She froze in surprise. He had said her name like it mattered, like she mattered. "I read the note you attached to your intake form," he continued, "the part where you asked not to be laughed at." Her cheeks flamed with shame. "I'm not here to judge you," he said. "I'm here to help you feel better, that's all. And if you prefer a different provider, a female doctor, a nurse practitioner, I can arrange that. No questions asked." Ivy hesitated. Part of her still wanted to flee. But another, quieter part of her, a tired, weary part, wanted so badly for this to finally end. Slowly, she lowered herself back onto the table, gripping the edge tightly. "Just don't look at me like I'm broken," she whispered. Dr. Harrington pulled up a stool, settling at her eye level. "I won't," he said simply. "Because you're not." Her heart still raced, but something inside her shifted. For the first time in years, someone truly saw her, not past her, not through her, not with pity, but saw her, and somehow that was enough to make her stay. Long before Ivy Reynolds ever sat on that examination table, she had been living with pain. Not just physical pain, but the deep ache of loneliness and shame. It had started in middle school. The snickers behind hands, the cruel nicknames whispered in the halls. Ivy didn't walk like the other girls. She shifted in her seat uncomfortably. Sometimes she winced when she bent down too fast. By 8th grade, a rumor had circulated. Ivy had but problems, and it stuck. She became the invisible girl, the one who wore oversized sweaters, who asked to leave class too often, who kept her voice a mere whisper. Her mother, a kind woman working 2 jobs, tried to be there for her, but Ivy couldn't find the words to explain the shame hollowing her out. By 16, Ivy gave up on wearing dresses, on gym class, on daydreams about slumber parties or first kisses. She found refuge in the corners of the school library, between dusty shelves and books that asked nothing of her. When Ivy was 17, her mother died suddenly of a brain aneurysm. Ivy didn't cry at the funeral. Not because she didn't feel the loss, but because she had already learned how to live behind a wall of numbness. She moved in with her grandmother, a gentle woman who made afternoon tea and never asked Ivy to be anything but quiet. It was the safest Ivy had felt in years. But safety wasn't the same as connection. Books became her world. She read endlessly, from classic novels to medical journals. She could name every muscle in the body, but couldn't meet a stranger's gaze. After earning her degree in library sciences, Ivy took a job at a small public library tucked between a laundromat and a coffee shop. She spent her days shelving books, labeling returns, and eating lunch alone in the supply closet. Yet the physical pain remained. It throbbed in her lower back, radiated through her hips, worsened when she sat too long. At night, she lay curled up with a heating pad, whispering to herself, "Just one more day, just one more day." She Googled symptoms, read forums, devoured books on alternative medicine, but never made an appointment. Being seen was scarier than the pain itself. Until one day, when it became too much, and she realized her biggest fear wasn't humiliation. It was living like this forever. So she wrote a note, trembling as she typed it into the online form. "I'm not asking for sympathy. Just please don't laugh at me." It was the bravest thing she had ever done. The morning of her appointment, she almost canceled 3 times. But something inside her, some tiny ember, kept her moving forward. Because Ivy didn't dream of a perfect life. She didn't crave fairy tales or grand adventures. She only wanted a simple thing: to sit down in a public place and not hurt, to laugh without wincing, to go to the movies without silently counting the minutes until she could stand again. The night before her appointment, she whispered into her pillow, "Just one day, please, just one day where I can sit without pain." She never imagined that this small, fragile hope would be the start of everything. Lucas Harrington never set out to be a millionaire. He simply was by birth, not by choice. His family owned one of the most. Lucas Harrington came from one of the most respected private hospital families on the East Coast. His father, a celebrated heart surgeon and influential businessman, had always expected Lucas to follow not just his career path, but also his ambition for prestige, expansion, and legacy. But Lucas had his own ideas. At 22, he graduated summa cum laude from Harvard. By 26, he had completed his residency with top honors and received fellowship offers from prestigious institutions across the country. He could have chosen any glamorous specialty, cardiology, neurosurgery, even plastic surgery, and secured a life of wealth and fame. Instead, Lucas chose colorectal surgery. People didn't understand. Even his father bluntly asked, "Why would you waste your talent on that?" Lucas didn't answer right away. He never did when it came to matters of the heart. He thought of his mother, a gentle, intelligent woman who always remembered the little things, like a nurse's favorite flower or a janitor's birthday. When she began to show symptoms, fatigue, unexplained bleeding, stomach pain, she kept it to herself. Even Lucas, already deep into medical school, hadn't known. "I was embarrassed," she confessed quietly from her hospital bed. "I thought it would pass. I didn't want anyone to look at me like I was broken." By the time they found the cancer, it was stage 4. She was gone within a year. Lucas never forgot. The shame, the silence, the way the world had taught her to be ashamed of her suffering. So he chose to be the doctor she never had. By 31, Lucas had made a name for himself not for flashy titles or media appearances, but for the trust he built with his patients. He wore simple scrubs, drove a modest car, and turned down offers that would have made him a celebrity surgeon. He believed healing started the moment someone felt safe enough to say, "This hurts." When Ivy Reynolds' file landed on his desk, it seemed routine at first. 26-year-old female, external hemorrhoids, chronic pain, conservative treatments failed. He almost moved on until he noticed a small handwritten note tucked inside. "I'm not looking for sympathy. I just ask, Please don't laugh when you look at me." Lucas froze, the shaky but determined handwriting hitting him hard. It reminded him of his mother, the way her hands had trembled when she finally asked for help. He closed the file carefully. This wasn't just a surgery. It was someone asking for dignity. When Lucas entered the exam room and saw Ivy, pale and anxious, he immediately recognized the emotion in her eyes. Raw, human shame. He spoke softly, sat down at her level, gave her time. And when she whispered, "Don't look at me like I'm broken," he answered without hesitation, "I won't." Because she wasn't. It wasn't a rehearsed speech. It was simply the truth. Lucas didn't fully understand why Ivy affected him so deeply. He had cared for thousands of patients before. He had seen resilience and suffering in all forms. But there was something about Ivy. The way she showed up despite her fear, the way she had left that brave little note, that he couldn't forget. And as he closed the exam room door behind him that day, he realized something else. He didn't want to forget her, not because of her pain, but because of the quiet courage she carried despite it. The day of her surgery came faster than Ivy expected. She had barely slept. Her stomach knotted not from the fear of pain, but from the fear of being seen, truly seen, in her most vulnerable state. At check-in, she struggled to meet the receptionist's eyes. Her hands shook as she signed the forms. Every step felt heavier, like walking under a spotlight. Then a nurse appeared, smiling warmly. "Dr. Harrington would like to meet with you in his private consultation room before we begin." Ivy froze. "Is something wrong?" The nurse shook her head. "Not at all. He just prefers to speak personally with patients for sensitive procedures." The consultation room felt different. No harsh lights, no medical equipment, just a soft, warm space that didn't feel like a hospital at all. Lucas stood by the window in plain scrubs, his coat off. When he turned to her, his expression wasn't clinical. It was kind, present. "Hi, Ivy," he said gently. "Thank you for coming early." She nodded, unable to speak. "I know this isn't easy," he continued. "I wanted to talk to you, not as your surgeon, but as someone who understands how scary this can be." Ivy sat down cautiously, gripping the chair's arms like a lifeline. "I don't want to sound dramatic," she whispered, "but this feels like the hardest thing I've ever done." Lucas smiled softly. "It's not dramatic," he said. "It's brave." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Ivy asked, almost inaudibly, "Have you ever laughed at a patient?" The question caught him off guard. He met her gaze, steady and serious, and shook his head. "I've laughed with patients," he said, smiling at the memory, "like when my mom danced down the hospital hallway after a tough treatment. But I have never laughed at someone's pain, especially not when they're facing it head-on." Ivy blinked, surprised by the sincerity of his words. Lucas leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "You once asked me not to look at you like you're broken," he said softly. "I didn't then. I won't now, because you're not broken. You're human. And sometimes, being human is the hardest thing of all." Something in Ivy's chest loosened, like a knot finally untangling. "You really don't think it's disgusting?" she asked, her voice small. "No," Lucas said simply, gently. "I think it's brave. Hiding our pain just because the world tells us to be ashamed is a tragedy," he said. Ivy studied his face, searching for even a hint of pity. But there was none, only understanding. And for the first time in a very long while, in that quiet room, Ivy didn't feel like something broken needing to be fixed. She felt seen. Lucas stood and extended his hand toward her. "We're going to take good care of you," he said warmly. "And when you wake up, this part of your life will be behind you." Ivy hesitated for just a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. It was a simple gesture, but to her, it felt like crossing a deep, invisible divide. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, and she nodded, her voice trembling. "I'm ready." As they walked toward the oar, Ivy's heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with something strange and unfamiliar. Hope. Recovery wasn't glamorous. Some days were good. Other days, Ivy struggled just to get out of bed. Often the pain wasn't even physical anymore. It was emotional echoes of old fears whispering that she still wasn't enough. But with each follow-up visit, those doubts weakened. Lucas always greeted her with the same quiet steadiness. Never rushed, never clinical. His warmth was subtle, but it soaked into the sterile hospital air like sunlight slipping through a crack in the curtains. At her third follow-up, after examining her healing and adjusting her care plan, Lucas glanced up from his notes with a slight smile. "Still reading Little Women every night?" he asked casually. Ivy blinked in surprise. "How did you know I read that?" she asked. He tilted his head thoughtfully. "You mentioned it during your first consultation. You said Joe March reminded you to be brave, even when it's hard. It stuck with me." Ivy stared at him, stunned. She had barely remembered saying it, just a nervous comment between adjusting her sleeves and catching her breath. But he had remembered. No one ever remembered little things about her. She found herself swallowing hard, the realization settling deep in her chest. He had seen her. Lucas stood to wash his hands, glancing at her through the mirror. "Joe's your favorite, right?" Ivy nodded slowly. She always felt like the girl who wanted more, but was scared to want too much, she said softly. Lucas turned back to her with a faint smile. "You don't seem scared anymore." "I am," she whispered, "but I don't want to be." After that appointment, Ivy lingered in the hallway longer than usual. Lucas walked to the door, and when he held it open, it was for a moment longer than necessary. Outside, the air was cool, but Ivy felt a warmth inside her that had nothing to do with the weather. She started to look forward to her appointments, not for the medical updates, but for the simple kindnesses. How Lucas remembered how she took her tea, how he never interrupted, how he waited, really waited, for her answers. One afternoon, Lucas noticed the edge of a worn paper bag peeking from Ivy's tote. "New book?" he asked. "Old favorite," she admitted, blushing. "I reread books a lot. They're safe. They don't change on you." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "I think people can be like that, too," he said, "if you let them." That night, Ivy opened her journal. For the first time in years, she didn't write about pain or shame. She wrote about possibility. She wrote, "He listens, not because he has to, but because he wants to. And I don't know what to do with that kind of attention." Lucas, too, noticed something changing between them. Ivy didn't care about his last name, his accolades, his wealth. When she asked him about his life, it wasn't with admiration. It was with genuine curiosity. One afternoon, as they wrapped up a check-in, Ivy asked quietly, "Why did you choose this specialty? You could have done anything." Lucas paused and answered simply, "Because people ignore their pain when it embarrasses them. I wanted to be someone they could trust not to turn away." He didn't say it to impress her. In fact, he didn't even look at her when he said it. But Ivy looked at him differently after that. Not as a doctor, not as a savior, but as someone who had chosen to see what the world preferred to overlook. And maybe, just maybe, that's why she felt safe. During her sixth follow-up, the room was still, filled only with the quiet ticking of the clock and the soft scratch of Lucas's pen. Their connection had grown familiar by then. Less patient and doctor, more two people who simply understood each other. When Lucas stepped out to review a scan, Ivy's gaze drifted around the room for the first time. She noticed a framed photo on the shelf beside a weather book called The Art of Compassionate Care. It showed a younger Lucas, smiling warmly with a woman whose beauty was touched by the quiet fatigue of illness. She wore a scarf wrapped around her head. Ivy recognized that kind of tired smile. When Lucas returned, he saw where she was looking and smiled softly. "That's my mom," he said. "Eleanor. She's beautiful," Ivy murmured. "She was," Lucas nodded, "and strong." "Was she sick?" Ivy asked carefully. Lucas's smile faded a little. "Colorectal cancer," he said quietly. "Stage 4. We found it too late." Ivy's eyes filled with tears she didn't even realize were there. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Lucas sat down beside her, voice low. "She hid it for months," he said. "Maybe longer. Thought it was just stress or something too embarrassing to mention. She didn't want me to see her as weak." He looked down for a moment, and by the time she asked for help, there wasn't much we could do. A tear slid down Ivy's cheek. She wiped it quickly, feeling the heavy ache of shared loss. "I used to think that too," she said. That if I just hit it long enough, maybe it would go away. Maybe I would go away. Her voice cracked. Lucas turned to her gently. "But you didn't," he said. "You stayed. You showed up. That matters." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, they were just two souls who had loved, lost, and somehow kept going. Lucas handed her a tissue. "Thank you," Ivy whispered. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He let it rest, soft and healing. And then, quietly, he said, "I think my mom would have liked you." Ivy smiled through her tears. "I think I would have liked her too." And they sat together, not as patient and doctor, but as people who had found a common language in the middle of their pain, a language of healing, not just of bodies, but of hearts. It took Lucas weeks to write the letter, not because he didn't know what he wanted to say, but because every word walked a dangerous line between his duty and his heart. Ivy had healed beautifully. She was no longer the fearful, broken girl who had first walked into his exam room. She had grown, bloomed, but the lines had blurred. He couldn't pretend they hadn't. So Lucas stepped back. He reassigned Ivy's care to another doctor. He left a note at the front desk, and a sealed envelope addressed to her. Inside, on a single sheet of paper, he had written, "Ivy, you are no longer my patient, which is the only reason I can write this. I didn't want you to ever wonder if what I feel was just duty or compassion or the oath I swore. It isn't. I don't want to heal you anymore. I just want to be near you, not because you need me, but because I need you. If you feel even the smallest part the same, I'll be here. No white coats, no charts, just me, Lucas." When Ivy read the letter, she sat motionless for a long time. She sat still for 10 whole minutes before carefully folding the letter and slipping it into her coat pocket. Like a delicate secret she wasn't ready to share with the world. That evening, after the library closed, Ivy made her way to the clinic. The building was quiet, the lights dimmed. She took the elevator to the rooftop garden, Lucas's favorite retreat, a hidden sanctuary above the city's noise. When she stepped onto the rooftop, she found him there, watering a small herb patch near the railing, his back to her, unaware of her presence. Her voice trembled slightly, but was strong enough to reach him. "I got your letter," she said. He paused, set the watering can down, but didn't immediately turn around. "I didn't think you'd come," he said softly. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I'm still working through everything." Now he turned, their eyes meeting under the soft string lights that lined the rooftop walls. "I'm not perfect," she continued. "I still flinch when people stare too long. I still sometimes forget how to breathe when things get overwhelming." She stepped closer. "But if you're still willing to read with me, to sit with me in silence on the hard days, I think I'm ready to stop running." Lucas didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He stepped forward, gently taking her hand in his warm, steady, grounding, and held it like something precious. "I've been waiting for you," he said. She smiled, hesitant but hopeful, and in that moment, under the open sky scented with rosemary and basil, they stopped being doctor and patient. They simply became two people choosing to stay. A year later, the library inside the Rosewood Community Center didn't seem remarkable at first glance. Just a cozy corner with mismatched armchairs, worn bookshelves, and soft yellow lighting that felt like a hug. But to those who came often, it was something more, the healing shelf. It had been Ivy's idea. After everything she'd endured, she didn't want a flashy job or a big gesture. She wanted a space where quiet souls with invisible scars could sit, read, breathe, and remember they weren't broken. Lucas funded the project without hesitation, not to have his name on a plaque, but because he believed in her and in them. They still had hard days. Ivy still startled at sudden noises. Lucas still carried the ache of losing his mother, but they learned to hold space for each other's healing. They didn't call it a fairy tale. They called it something better, an honest love. Most mornings, Ivy arrived early to arrange books by theme, grief, hope, new beginnings, while Lucas would stop by between patients, bringing her coffee and quietly helping label new donations. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. Either way, it was enough. On the first anniversary of a Healing Shelf's opening, the community center hosted a mental health seminar. The final speaker was Ivy, standing behind a podium in a floral blouse, her hands only trembling a little. She faced the room. Lucas sat in the front row, steady and proud. When I was younger, Ivy began, her voice steady. I thought healing meant not hurting anymore, that if I could be brave enough, good enough, invisible enough, the pain would just disappear. She looked at the crowd, strangers, friends, survivors. But I was wrong. Healing isn't about pretending you're not hurt. It's about letting yourself be seen even while you're still bleeding. It's about someone sitting with you, not to fix you, but to remind you that you're not alone. She paused, gathering herself. There was a time I would have run from a moment like this, from people, from myself. She glanced at Lucas, her voice softening. But someone didn't let me. He didn't rescue me, she said, tears touching her voice. He stayed. When I was hurting, when I was scared, when I didn't know if I was worth staying for. The room was silent in the way that only true listening creates. And because of that, she said, I learned to love the parts of myself I used to hide, the parts one thought made me too much or not enough. She smiled bright and brave. And now, I help others find that love too, one story, one book, one quiet afternoon at a time. The audience erupted in applause, some standing, some wiping tears. Ivy stepped down from the stage, her heart pounding, but in a way that made her feel alive. Lucas met her at the back of the room. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her the way he always had, like she was someone worth seeing. You were incredible, he said quietly. I almost fainted, she laughed, a little breathless. But you didn't, he said, smiling. He took her hand in his. You used to hide from the light, he said. Now you are the light. Tears shimmered in her eyes. I think you were the first person who ever really saw me in it, she whispered. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. You helped me see it too, he said. They stood together, hand in hand, surrounded by the quiet, humble room filled with hope. They weren't perfect, but they were whole, because love, they had learned, wasn't about fixing each other. It was about choosing each other again and again, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. They no longer feared being seen. They had each other, and that was enough. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand decorations. Sometimes it shows up in quiet moments, in stillness, in the sacred act of being truly seen. Ivy never needed saving. She needed someone who would stay, through the hurting, through the healing, through the relearning of love. And Lucas, he hadn't fallen for a perfect woman. He had fallen for her bravery, for the quiet way she kept choosing her own life. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, and that made it even more beautiful.